Okay. Thank you again. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to everybody who's on both sides of the ocean. Those of you who don't know me, I'm David Hoffman, the president of the Honey Foundation for Israel. It's a great privilege to welcome people to this critical and timely conversation with Yavilah McCoy. Yavilah is an important voice in American Judaism. She has been convening conversations and doing frontline activism around issues pertaining to race and diversity and inclusion for several decades. And what that really means is that she's helping communities to transform their culture into one that is rooted in relationship and commitment to seeing the humanity of each individual. Yavilah is a unique voice, teaching a very special Torah because she embodies a set of intersecting identities as an Orthodox Jewish woman of color. Yavilah is going to help us understand the significance and the relevance to all of us of the recent events in the United States. The tragic murder of George Floyd on May 25th catalyzed the largest protest movement in the history of the United States. And let's quickly put that in context. The sheer breadth and number of people who have taken to the streets is much larger than even the protests of the civil rights struggles of the 1960s. This movement has catalyzed conversations in the US about race, racism, structural exclusion, and how privilege is built into the foundation of American society. These conversations are happening informally and formally in Jewish communities across America as well. And though there is a particular reckoning happening in America, one that needs to happen in America, what's amazing is this movement has been a global movement with protests over 40 countries and over 6 continents. And that is because the underlying values of this movement transcend any one geographic location, any one context. Those who care about the role of leadership in building healthy communities that are inclusive and embracing of diversity, who care about building a society that is equitable and just, need to pay attention to this moment and the voices of its leaders. And that's why the Honey Foundation for Israel is convening this conversation today, because we invest in leaders who are seeking to build communities that are inclusive and embracing of diversity. We invest in leaders who care about building a society that is equitable and just, who are harnessing the transformative power of Judaism to do this very work and simultaneously build a new vision of Israeli Judaism and Jewish community. We at the Honey Foundation believe this is a critical moment in world history and in the history of the Jewish people, a moment filled with challenges, but it's also filled with precious opportunities for connection. And we believe leadership is the key to creating more connection. Yavilah, I see you in that square, and what an honor and a pleasure it is to have you here. But your whole life has been dedicated to the vision of building communities that can hold differences, allowing people to see the full humanity of the other. You are a pioneer of the Jewish equity movement and a mentor to so many for the empowerment of the trans global community of color. The consulting group Dimensions, of which you are the founder and CEO, is the center of many of those transformative conversations. And for all of those reasons and more, we at the Honey Foundation feel so blessed to be in conversation with you. So Yavilah, why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your story and the work you do in the world. And as a note, there will be a period of questions at the end of our time. And so if you have a question, please send it in the chat. But Yavilah, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, good morning, Boker Tov from where I sit. And Bruchim Habayim, it's good to be with all of you. A little bit about myself, just because people may not be used to seeing somebody like me in the teacher role here at Honey Foundation. So I want to let you know a little bit about myself. I was raised in Crown Heights in Flatbush, Brooklyn, in an Orthodox Jewish home. I attended yeshivot from elementary through high school, after which I then attended a secular state university and then Hebrew University and seminary in Har Nof, Yerushalayim. In addition to being the CEO of Dimensions, which is an international consulting company, I'm also a Jewish mother. I have 6 children. I'm a sister. I'm a teacher. I'm an equity practitioner, and I'm an activist. And what I wanted to say in coming to you this morning with a word of Torah is that all of these identities have shaped my understanding of myself as a leader, have shaped my ability to be an Ovedet Hashem and a global citizen. What's most important these days is to be able to look out into the world and see that we're facing a global pandemic. We're facing widespread racial protests. We're facing the rise of fascism. We're facing destabilization and mass migrations born of war, famine, and unprecedented global crises and instability. We are at a crossroads. And as a woman who has constantly stood at crossroads with my leadership, I find that my best tool for doing so is to open people's hearts and minds to the benefits of choosing deeper proximity instead of isolation, of leaning in to see each other's pain and engaging in repair, of looking for opportunities for restorative justice and accountability instead of blaming and shaming and avoiding contact. The equity work that I do teaches people to recover the deepest sense of their humanity in relationship. It teaches people to engage in a process of reflection, of discovery, and then action toward transformation of historic inequities. Many of the things that are between us didn't just start today. They started many, many, many years ago. And in our inability to be in relationship with one another, we're holding a very long call for healing and repair, that we can be the ones, we as teachers and leaders can be the catalyzers to be able to make a difference in. So when I rise each day and I say Moda'ani, and when I say Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof, and when I say Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, I'm talking about helping the Jewish people and all people to recover the deepest sense of their humanity in relationship. I'm grateful for all that I've been given, and therefore I can't hold that back from others. Moda'ani, Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof. We have to create courts that can hold justice as a Jewish people. So why would I stand by when I'm looking at injustice in a country that cannot hold justice for all? Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam. I'm not waiting for somebody else to do it. I'm doing it. I have to wake up every day grateful for what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given to me. And so I have to also take that seriously in the way that I help others. So all of these things were taught to me by my parents and grandparents and shaped my evolution and survival as a Black Jewish woman in the US. So those are just some things that you need to know about me before we start the conversation.
Oh, it's so good and so rich. And we want more, but we know our time is limited. Yavilah, you have mentioned how the word proximity is central to the work you do. Maybe unpack what it is that you mean. What are the ideas that you're getting at when you go ahead and refer to proximity as central to the work?
So proximity is the idea that I can best appreciate another human being's experience by seeing the whole human in all of its dimension. Not taking one paintbrush and smearing it across the human and saying, well, we're all the same if we're Orthodox. We're all the same if we are women. We are all the same if we are Jews. There are ways in which holding the nuance of what a human actually is in its full diversity comes from being willing to be proximate, close by, listening in for what might be missed. And so in the context of the work that I do, getting people proximate across lines of race has been about helping people to understand that we separated ourselves from each other based on racial lines in order to avoid having to hold each other's humanity. When the prospect of going around the world and dominating and taking over regions and territories came as a leadership opportunity within Europe, the best way to facilitate that happening was to create race and racism and white supremacy so that it can validate the violence and destruction that some of us decided to inflict upon other of us. It's easier when you're coming into a country to destroy, to say that I'm not destroying humans, I'm destroying Jews. Or I'm not destroying humans, I am destroying Black people. I am destroying savages. And so this inhumanity that was built into our separation from one another is something that in our country got baked into our systems. So what you're seeing today in the street is a historical, long, evolutionary cry for justice. Justice that came when the US Constitution said to us here that you could take a human being and devalue them in percentages. You're only a percentage a human, not a whole human. That a human, unlike our tradition, could be owned. That a human could be separated, that when another human walks down the street, one human has to step off the curb and the other human gets to stand. One person gets to have a business and the other person not. So when you see what is being described in the streets of the US, it's a long call for our humanity. And it's important for us to understand that that inhumanity that got visited upon us as Black people in the US robbed us of important resources, robbed us of the ability to be able to function in a society with our dignity in place. And it's time to do restorative justice and bring that back.
This Torah that you're teaching, this notion of getting proximate, of getting close to someone, of getting close to people, in fact, who represent different ideas, and it's only through that moment of getting close that we heal. It is I think it's one of the blessings of our generation, that our generation, the gifts of this generation realizes of the importance of being in relationship, of these one-on-ones, of getting to know people. And I think that's, it's so basic and it's such a simple idea, but it's such a deep truth. And it's one of these building blocks that so much good can be built on. And so that Torah of getting proximate, of the importance of seeing one another is so deep. Yavilah, clearly, there has been racial unrest in the United States and elsewhere many times over our history. But somehow what we're experiencing right now feels a little bit different. The question I would like to hear from you, and I think all of us, is it different? And is this moment of race work in the United States, the opportunities here, special? And why specifically is this moment important for American Jews and Jewish communities?
Well, one of the things that I call it is a crossroads. A crossroads moment is that, any protest that you're ever going to see is made up of multiple human voices crying out for change, crying out for the need for tshuva. Every single person to a protest, every single person that you're going to encounter in the street has their own lived experience that has brought them to the need to cry out. So when you hear people crying out in the streets for justice as they are in the United States right now, we have to understand that we are at a crossroads and that we are being asked to reckon with our history of racism. We're being asked to think not just about whether we like each other or not in the US, but how have laws and systems and ways of being systematically created hierarchies of value between humans that have denied people their dignity, that have denied people the opportunity of life and death in this country. COVID-19 made it impossible for us to disregard disparities here in the US. It made it impossible for us to not notice that our country's wealth is being built on the back of Black and brown slave labor, around the expropriation of immigrant labor. We are noticing the ways in which people are being called essential, but not being given fair wages. We're noticing the ways in which people who live with us, who take care of our children, are most vulnerable to COVID-19 in ways that we are not. There are ways in which we became proximate to the idea that we don't live equal here in the US. And we have to redistribute our benefits and our resources to make sure that more of us are able to experience human dignity. So I think it's a combination of both COVID-19 and the culture of protest that has opened our eyes wide here and caused us as Jews and all over the world to think differently about how we hold our humanity.
And regarding American Jewish communities, and regarding Jewish communities we'll get to sort of globally, why is this moment filled with opportunity? How is this moment filled with opportunity?
Well, we're a people who have experienced oppression and targeting over the course of 5,000 years. So I would assume somehow across our various travels through the diaspora, we might know something about the need to call out for justice and equity. If anybody is ignorant to that need, we only have to look back to where we've come from. And when we think about the idea that at one point in Russia, in law, they were close to 2,000 different laws to mitigate the ability of Russian Jews to move around the country. That's an understanding of what systemic oppression can look like. 2,000 different laws just related to Jews. So we come from a history where the countries that we experienced ourselves as visitors to in Europe taught us what it means to have our dignity and our humanity suppressed. Yes? If we've arrived at a place of freedom in the US, it is only conscionable that we as Jews continue to think about the ways in which we may have been gifted at the exclusion of other people's ability to have dignity. It's only appropriate for us to think about, is this a misplaced parcel amongst our baggage in our travels through diaspora that we come to be in such close proximity and contact with white supremacy and racism in the US? Does it have anything to do with being Jewish? And the answer for me is no. I learned to be an embodied Jew. When I was raised as a Jew, it was about how I ate, it was about how I spoke, it was about how I dressed, it was about how I moved. And what racism tried to tell me is all I get to be is the color of my skin. That is a robbery to me and every Jew. Any system that tells you that your humanity can be denied, that your Jewishness can be denied because of the color of your skin is a robbery to our community. So in this time, how can we be morally conscionable and yes, celebrate the freedom and prosperity that we've experienced in the US and in other countries, but also stand for what we know and what we've learned over 5,000 years, which is that racism, whiteness, and white supremacy is a misplaced parcel among us as Jews and has no place here, has no place here.
Amen, amen, amen. But the tendency, that you were talking about to reduce people to one image, to one quick image, and not embrace their enormous complexity, and in fact, even their contradictory aspects, I think is something that we all do, and we probably do it because we're afraid, because it's easy, but to actually hold the complexity of a person, right, in non-two dimensions, it's more difficult for us because we see the world through Zoom now. But to actually appreciate the dimensions, I think is a tremendous religious skill.
Absolutely. And teachers can be catalyzers for that. I think it's super important to notice what the role of leadership is in making that possible for young people. When we look at the formation of the state of Israel, since there are a lot of people here who are listening from Israel, when we formed the state, we had grand dreams and aspirations about that, holding that kind of dimension across the people who would be making up Israel. We said that we wanted people to have full, equal, and social and political rights, that regardless of differences of religious faith, race, sex, that there would be freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, culture. I am reading directly from the Israeli Constitution. And when we said all of those things, that was just the beginning. Living into it in terms of how we practice with each other, in terms of our behaviors with each other, was the next hill to cross. And so if we have not crossed that hill in the last 60, 70 years, now is the time to cross it, because there are consequences now in the world for leaving other people behind. And we as USers and Israelis have to join in doing that work to have each other in the deepest sense of our humanity. And that is core to our tradition as Jews.
It's such a deep truth, and you're bringing up the gap between the language that we use, the language that we write, and perhaps the way in which we live into the world, the way in which we lean into things or not lean into things. So Yavilah, I have to say, I first met you because you were doing a project at BJ at B'nai Jeshurun with my wife, who's also a rabbi, on the Upper West Side. And when I originally heard about this work, I smiled at Shuli and I said, really? Do we have to do this work on the Upper West Side in such a progressive Jewish community? And so what you're bringing up for me is the gap, and I want you to speak to this because I think many of us in the American Jewish community think that this lesson is for somebody else. And I think the gap between rhetoric and words and even prayers and living into things. So maybe speak about that. And then I want to get back to the idea about leadership and the role of leaders, because that's who we are.
Well, what I'll say to you is that in words, we've always spoken about being one klal, one an inclusive people. Indeed, there's a difference between inclusion and actually holding equity. How do we know this? Because in truth, if I were to snap my fingers right now and I had a magic, snap like a genie, and I could bring all Jews that exist in the world right now onto this Zoom call, you would be looking at tiles that looked more like the United Nations than the United Nations itself. Because the Jewish people hold such diversity and dimension, not just in our physicality, but in our practice, in our language, in our ways of being, that in order to hold us as one people, we can't just say everybody can be in the same room. We have to be listening hard for what does everyone here need to actually be to actually be klal. And how can we be speaking to that in what we call Torah? How can we be speaking to that in what we call leadership? How can we be speaking to that in what we say we are as Jewish global citizens of the world? So what I want to have people looking at is what are the internal stories among us as Jews that must be heard and welcomed in this moment for us to be able to say that we have learned the hard lessons of our 5,000 years of pain and suffering and targeting as Jews. How can we share our resources across our community more equitably? What is the 2020 version of Pe'ah and Shikha? What does it mean for us to acknowledge that we are not valued most succinctly by the things we own, by our materialism, by our titles? We are valued by the fact that we were born as created beings and share that with all humanity. How is that showing up in our classrooms? How is that showing up in the way we teach? How is it that we can hold this idea that when we invite folks into our home, they don't stay guests as long as we say, my home is your home? If someone comes into your home and you keep treating them like a guest, they're a guest. They're not at home. So what would it look like to create nuanced opportunities for all Jews to call the Jewish people home? That is something that I can see no better place for us to be practicing or working on that as a reality than in the state of Israel, than in the way in which USers and Israelis can think across geographical lines, across oceans, as to how to make that possible.
Yavilah, though, but the rhetoric, sometimes I hear the words of the Jewish community and we're actually getting it right. But there's a gap between, I think, the way in which we speak and the livedness of our Torah. And so how do we actually bring that gap closer together? And what's the role of leaders in that? And what is, the particular challenges of the American Jewish community, both in the United States and Israel? I think, one of the facts, the percentage of Jews of color in the United States, recently there were these studies, and it's quite significant. We're speaking about, you know better than I, but upwards of 10%. And that is significant. And what are the ways in which we are creating communities that are welcoming? What are the gaps? What's getting in the way even of enlightened Jewish communities?
Well, the only thing I can do is that the best way to recover my humanity is to know that I am seen and heard, and that my stories are being carried by those who feel similarly implicated by my experience. So the best thing I can do for you is tell you what it's like to walk into Jewish institutional spaces, to be in educational opportunities as a Jew and not feel at home. The most succinct way that I can explain it to you is in our use of the pronoun we. Something that I think is the first step that leaders and teachers have to understand is when you say we, who do you mean? If I've just taught you that the reality is that Jews are more diverse than the United Nations itself, when you say we, are you holding that in the way in which you use that pronoun? Anachnu. Who is anachnu? Who is it? And who's being left out? And then another way to be able to think about that is in the context of the way in which we're teaching Torah and thinking historically and toward the future. Can you imagine 7 generations forward that have to hold that we too? And what is it that they have to learn now to be able to hold us as a people 7 generations forward from now as being able to embrace and live into loving community around that diversity? If you can hold that concept in your mind as a frame, there's a lot about what you're doing right now that is going to shift. There's more. I mean, there are ways in which people don't hear the ways in which in the United States, whiteness has been kind of built into our understanding of what it means to be Jewish. What does that look like? When I walk into a bookstore and somebody asks me, can I help you? And assumes that I cannot read the Torah itself, when I actually can read the Torah in Hebrew, in Yiddish, and Aramaic as a result of my education. What does it look like when I walk into a Jewish space and someone asks me if I am the help? Someone hands me their car keys and asks me to go park their car. What does it look like to hold that we when we are in shul and we're talking about those other people of color who are being targeted by racism, when the truth is anybody with brown skin who is assumed not to be Jewish is a target for racism in the US because of the way white supremacy has created a binary around our humanity. We are not our Judaism. We are how people perceive us. So there's ways in which we have to do the work to trouble that we, to make that we have a little bit more depth, but also to be witnesses to the fact that because tzedek, tzedek, tirdof means that justice, justice as a people shall we pursue, we cannot stand idly by as we watch injustice happening to others. There's a way in which our young people have to understand that it's a matter of moral conscience and a matter of standing up for the Torah itself to be able to speak to the issues of equity. This is not just for people who are on the left or who are social justice mavens. This is for anybody who reads the Torah and sees the dangers that our prophet spoke to us about of losing proximity to our connection to God and justice as a way of being, not words, as a way of being. So all of these things are an avodah for us to hold in this moment.
I love that. I love describing it as an avodah. Indeed, it's an intention, it's a contemplation, and it's also religious work and work, right? It is actual work. The notion that your ideas are echoing in my head, because the idea that you could write somebody off as the first image that you see, you think you understand them, you think you know them, they're this person, they're the help, they don't know anything, they know this, and without actually engaging them. I mean, we do it in America all the time. I think we do that with other Jews all the time. The notion, as you say, which is so powerful, of the we, right? The group holds the we. The community, right? The Dati community holds this. The Chiloni community, whatever that is, holds this. And it's all of these binaries, and we're missing out on life. We're missing out on the complexity of people. And so this nudge, the agitation that you're giving us to actually live proximate, to go ahead and relate to all of these complex Jews and human beings who have all of the different ideas, I think is so important. So tachlis, when you walk into a community and you do this work, what are you asking the leaders to go ahead and do? How do you transform the culture of a community in Zichron Yaakov? that actually is reflective about the anachnu. How do we do that on the Upper West Side?
Well, I tell you, everything for me starts with reflection, discovery, and then movement toward action. But I learned this in my early days in a Hasidic yeshiva when they taught me the difference between machshava, dibur, and maaseh. That if something is actually going to come to a fruition in reality, it starts as a thought, but then it has to be spoken into the world. And as it's spoken into the world, it takes shape and should be followed by action. So in the context of this space, we have to reflect on who is in and who is out. And every community, without shame or blame, has categories of inness and outness. There are people who are living at the center, and there are people who are living at the margins. If you want to understand we, you have to be willing to listen to the margins. You have to be able to listen to what's happening on the edges. And as you hear what's happening on the edges, we've just come out of Tisha B'Av. We have to move from a place of sinas chinam, which is being suspicious, a little bit, the stranger is not quite us. Kamsa bar kamsa, yes? You're not quite one of us, and therefore you have to go. Moving from sinat chinam to ahavat chinam. Gratuitous love. Everybody who comes in here is worthy of love, and showing that and living into that. If you create opportunities for ahavat chinam, no one is going to get lost. They're all going to get caught in that net of love. We have to move from a place of thinking that we're only what we do for one another. As educators, I see you as farmers. I see you as people who plant seeds. You may not even see the trees that grow from those seeds, but you have to be planters that allow your students and your congregants and the people who are with you to have things come out of your mouth into their hearts, into their neshamot, that grow and flower across their lifetimes. The way to do that is to plant in people that they are not what they do. They are not just what they have. They are inherently valuable because they are. And if that's what they see in your eyes, then they will always remember that. When I was in school, I was the only Black child in a yeshiva of 300 young women. And the principal would come into our classrooms as we were learning Torah in the morning. And sometimes he would take over the class, and you would never know when he was going to do that. So it was supposed to instill in us a sense of readiness, a sense of zrizut about our learning, yes? And what happened when he came to you with an impromptu question that you weren't asked, that you weren't ready for, and you answered it correctly, he would come over to your desk and he would lean in, kind of like I'm leaning into your screen right now, and he would look in your eyes and he would go, excellent. And I still remember the power of Rabbi Newman's ability to lean close to me and give me that hakara, give me that appreciation. Excellent, Yavilah, because that's what I remained accountable to. So if there's a way in which you are relating to the people you are teaching that makes them feel excellent, that makes them feel valued, that makes them feel like they don't have to do something for you in order to be loved by you, that is the beginning of equity. Because you're not going to leave them out of the parsha, because you always remember them and you remember their stories and you remember how they're living and you're making sure that they count.
I love that. I think that's so important. The founder of the foundation, Bill Lipsy, talks about the role of communal rabbis. And one of the roles that he understands communal rabbis is to help people, is to help people be seen. And one of the key elements of a community, one of the key elements of a healthy community is a place in which people feel seen and people actually can go ahead and see others in all of their fullness. And to create, as you're saying, that environment, I mean, that was a precious story. And you enacted it so well of your teacher actually looking at your eyes and seeing you, Yavilah. I see you in all of your uniqueness. And I think that's the great struggle of all of our communities and societies, to create these places where we are seen. Big picture, what do you think that American Jews do well in this regard? What is something that in your musing through American society and teaching this Torah for so long that you have been inspired by? and tell us something that Israeli Jews you think might in fact do very, very well, and that we can learn from each other as we move, as we both of these communities lean into this avodah, as you say.
So, in thinking about the fact that this morning I'm becoming and speaking to a mixed audience, and I'm using that word tongue in cheek, USers and Israelis, there's a way in which I was thinking about the different opportunities that we hold across the ocean. In Israel, one of the things that actually is a ma'ala and can possibly be a chisaron, a benefit and a lacking, is that we take for granted that we are all Israelis in Israel. In Israel, we have a national identity that we each have to subscribe to in order to be a part of the way we live in the land of Israel. Whether it be schooling, whether it be the army, whether it be the way in which we operate in businesses, there's a common national identity that holds us together. And so because of that, there are ways in which we might assume that in that common identity, we actually are all the same. I've heard people say to me about Israel, like, race doesn't actually exist in Israel. Like we don't have this word race, or we don't
Jews.
Really talk about, right? We're just Jews. And there's a way in which not having the capacity to talk about the reality that people are actually experiencing is actually a chisaron. It's not a gift to tell someone, I don't see what is right in front of my face. I don't see you. There's a way in which we're going to have to find a different way to be able to say, I do see you exactly as you are, and you are still at home. So I think there's a challenge that we have to look at. How does nationalism that we hold in Israel sometimes create a blind spot? Sometimes create ways in which we take one paintbrush and we spread it across everyone, and we stop seeing or holding or valuing the diversity and the nuance of what it means to be a people. And the fear that comes up when we start to try to name differences, that we're going to lose something, that we won't be safe, that we're in danger to talk about differences. So that's one of the ma'alot and the challenges that, you can walk around on a street in Israel and see so much diversity and immediately feel like I'm home. I'm finally home. And then yet it only takes one experience of somebody using the term kushi, or one experience of someone assuming that as an Ethiopian that I don't have the same rights as everyone else. And I'm not even Ethiopian. There's ways in which in the times that I spent in Israel that the inequities were harder to name because of the understanding that we are all the same. So that's one thing that I'm going to say. In the US, it's the opposite. We're such rampant individuals. Even though we're all USers, everybody's got to have a different kippah, and everybody's got to have a different shul, and everybody's got to have a different politic, and we all want to be individuals, yes? In that rampant individualism, sometimes what we lose in the US is what is the core common value, the core common ethics that binds us together across our differences as Jews, to call us into action for something bigger than ourselves. That is something our country is struggling with right now, and our Jewish communities are struggling with as well. What is the Jewish ethic that creates character in the US that will call us into conscionable action in this moment? Instead of us having 20 opinions about that, what is the one North Star? We would love for it to be the Torah. We would love for it to be our Jewishness. We would love for it to be about the core essence of who we are as Jews that we've carried and protected for so long. And yet we struggle. We struggle. And because we struggle, the story of equity and the story of inclusion becomes a different story in every congregation that I meet. I would love for us to say we are commonly implicated by the need to dismantle racism, because as Jews, period, it has no place among us. I would like us to be able to say our moral conscience that we share across all Jews in the US causes us to be able to act conscionably when we see injustice, period, without having to parse out and do the masam matan that we end up having to do in order before we can even sit in a room here in the US. So I think there are benefits and there are losses that come from too deep a sense of nationalism that obliterates and erases difference, and too deep a sense of individualism that doesn't allow us to hold the bigger picture, the North Star that calls us forward. So it's a both and.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's very, very right. And I was just thinking particularly, and I don't think this is related to any particular historical context, the ways in which racism and the inability to actually go ahead and see other human beings, that fundamental problem bleeds outwards into various conversations, whether it's politics, whether it's various iterations of racism in various societies. And obviously Israel has the challenge of Ethiopian Jews, and it has other challenges as well. And America has its particular challenges. But the core, the unifying element here is the inability, as we said at the beginning, to get proximate, to see one another. American society is falling apart, I think, right now, one, because of the racial conversation, but a permutation of that is the inability to actually listen to anybody and be in a room with somebody who doesn't think exactly like me,
Exactly.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Who doesn't see, who seemingly, by the way, seemingly is exactly like me, looks exactly like me, uses the words of the same socioeconomic background as me. And probably technology has only exacerbated and amplified these little Zoom rooms that we're all in even before COVID, where we only gather with people. But that disease, the pathology of not seeing and not listening, it really is engulfing the world. And I think we're reaching a critical moment.
Absolutely. I mean, I believe racism is born of deep hubris. I mean,
Say more.
we as a people understand that we cannot commoditize and own anything in this world, that everything in this world actually is a gift for us to enjoy that was given to us gratis from this place of avas chinam, from our relationship with God. So there's a way in which our tradition teaches us not to believe that our opinion or our way of being or our power is the center of everything. The whole story of Mitzrayim itself was pushing against a Paro who said, the Nile, Ani hayor v'ani shisihu, I am the Nile and I am its source. This was a man who felt like nature and everything in it could be commoditized and centered around his own ego. So when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paro and said freedom, what he said is not first let them go. He said, give them 3 days just to acknowledge that there is something bigger than you, Paro, that you are not the source of all things, that they actually have a relationship with something bigger than you that actually animates the entire universe. When we as Jews are pushing back against racism, we're pushing back against the idea that it is only what I think and only how I am that matters most in what happens next. There's a humility that has to come in order to work for equity. The humility is that I'm nothing. I am dust. I am ashes. I am something that comes and goes. I am temporary, but I am more when I live into who I am with you. Bein Adam lechavero. You know, all of this is what precedes the idea of having a Torah. It's our relationship, our ability to be in humble, compassionate relationship with one another. So the road to changing our behavior really, I feel like, is going to be for us to step back with some humility and some compassion and ask some questions about who has been left on the margins. How can we listen to narratives that haven't been heard? Who are the people who have been impacted by racism in our own communities? How can we use Torah to speak to our duty to eliminate racism from our historical and present experience? And what about our commitment to the divine image of God that's in every human being is about ending white supremacy and racism and stopping people from suffering because of those who are seen and not seen in their full humanity.
I mean, on the one hand, I want to say Amen. And I will say in my own rabbinate, one in my own religious life, but in the religious life that I seek to cultivate in others, it is so difficult, particularly in religious communities, and I mean spiritual communities. I don't only mean, I mean cultivating the soul and the spiritual side, the notion you want to bring a certain sense of passion, you want to bring a certain sense of intensity. And I think with that conversation, people want to feel, particularly, by the way, and now in our day where our foundations have been torn apart given COVID, but even before COVID, the idea is we want passion and we want something true. We want to get behind something true in our society, right? And the question is, how can you have truth? How can you have passion? And how can you have the humility that you're speaking about? Because I think you are exactly right, that the problem is an intellectual hubris, is a cockiness, and that leads to a place of rejection of the other and the inability to go ahead and see. So how do we as teachers, and you're such a passionate speaker, you're such a passionate liver of life, how do you communicate that to your children, to your community, to the people that you mentor, and also engender this notion of humility, that we have to be open?
So there are two phrases that I'll teach today. One is from my grandmother, when she would say, when we would go down the street and we would see someone possibly who was in a wheelchair or who was injured, and the instinct was to look away, she would say, no, know that there but for the grace of God go I. That was her phrase. That there but for the grace of HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be you. So not look at somebody's infirmity, but see their infirmity as the possibility of your own humanity. That was a lesson I started to learn from the time I was very young, that you have to look at other human beings and see them, because there, but for the whatever it is, the grace that you've been offered could be you. And if that's true, how would you want to be seen? And if that was true, how would you want to be treated? So humility there. And the second one is, I've taught this before, that when I was younger, before we would daven, there was a big banner across the front of the classroom that said, Da lifnei mi ata omed. It didn't say at omedet, it said ata omed. So already there were some issues there. But there's a way in which we were taught that in order to even open ourselves up to ask or to have space, we had to kind of humble ourselves to understand, who are we standing before? And as I got older and I started to, I had to endure racism in the yeshiva environments that I was in, I often would pray, Hashem, may everybody in this classroom know before whom they stand, so that when they look at me, they see Selam Elokim in me and not just the color of my skin. So that before we pray, when we look at each other, we are seeing God in each other. And because we see God in each other, our behavior with each other is going to change. That's the kind of thing that we can apply to our Torah tradition from a place of humility. That if I'm standing before God, when I'm standing before you, I would never treat you differently. If I'm standing before God, when I look into your eyes, I have to listen to what you have to say. I have to spend a little bit more time with more patience. This is the kind of Torah that will help us to deepen our compassion. Now, we're human. We're going to make mistakes every single day. But to be in a constant avodah of learning and coming and doing tshuva is going to bring us to a closer space of reckoning.
I'm glad you acknowledge that, because when you speak, it seems you're so convincing. It seems so easy. I just want to grab your hand and walk with you, right? And walk with you. And I have the confidence that we can go ahead and do this. And that's a very, very special skill. But let me ask you to reflect. When you speak, it seems so easy. You combine like the words and the leaning in. You have been in some very difficult rooms. I know that. Some challenging moments with people who may not see you in your fullness, in lots of different rooms, but you've been able to do that. So maybe share with us an obstacle and sort of like the avodah, sort of more granular. How do you do that? How do you get into a room with women, with men, with people of all colors that sometimes have anti-Semitism, who are racist, who feel other things, who do not see you in your fullness, but yet you seem to be, I have seen you have been able to go ahead and be present for those conversations. Give us more. How do you do it?
I mean, I'm going to tell you about my walk. Yeah, I'll tell you about my walk. And this is not you know, Torah actually is from the root Tur, which means a line or a path. And I always have felt that my relationship to Torah has been about refining my path, about making myself walk in this world for every day that Hashem has given me life as a better human being. So when I say I'm trying to embrace others' humanity, I'm first trying to embrace my own humanity. And as a human, I'm imperfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to say things I'm not supposed to say. I'm going to do things that hurt other people. The key is, what is the process of reflection that brings me to tshuva? When I wake up and I've realized, oh, I may have hurt someone else, how do I stand in accountability to that? And how do I say, wait a minute, it's not over because I have more power than another person, because I'm the teacher and they're the student. I'm accountable to go back and engage in repair and to first listen, because Rambam teaches us about tshuva that you can't really engage in repair until you're clear on what the wrong was. How are you going to find out what the wrong was if you don't humble yourself to listen to somebody else's pain? So the very first thing that I do is I try to quiet myself when I'm facing racism and to notice what is the source of this human's disconnection from my humanity. Often that's somebody else having disconnected them from their humanity. So from that very place of start, I can come at the conversation from a place of compassion. I have no idea what happened to bring you to the state of humanity that you are in right now, but I do know that if you were to recover your humanity, we could both be better humans together. There's a way in which it's an avodah, because people, when they're hurting you, they make you angry. They make you cry. They make you want to run away. That's human, because we learn as humans to protect ourselves. The reason why I'm calling it an avodah is because that's what avat chinam is. It's that you have to lean in for the full experience of love, whether you think you're going to get something on the other side of it or not. And that trains you to be able to listen for what is the emergent humanity between us. Now, I have done that in the US. I have done that in South Africa. I've listened to Mandela and his students talk about that in regard to the process that they've gone through around truth and reconciliation, around apartheid in South Africa. Forgiveness is a powerful thing. This idea that we're heading into the Yomim Noraim and we're talking about forgiveness, it's not a small thing. You have to first be able to live as a human that has the capacity to forgive terrible wrongs before you can ask somebody else to meet you in your humanity. So it's an avodah is what I'm going to say. But if we don't start by first being able to name what was the wrong, what are the things that are injustice? What are the things that need to be fixed? What's my role? Bishvili neva olam. What's my role in engaging in repair? What am I willing to listen for? To know the road, to know the tour, to know the path that's going to take me to a different place. And then to take action, to actually do the thing so that when you come around to next Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you are actually a different person. The address for that wrong no longer exists. That's the road to me for racial equity.
Oh, I will tell you, I just have to share, Yavilah, that is such a gift to me as somebody who's inhabited this circle, where you're actually, I often think that in the circle, the metaphor is Yetziat Mitzrayim, is the notion of the stranger, is the ger, and that's the go-to to open up our heart to that experience and have that story echo in our heads forever. And by the way, there is no more powerful narrative than that, right? Yeah. And that's why all the great religious leaders have used that theme, because the notion that God looks at the world and sees servitude and says, this is not the way the world should be, we must act. There's no more powerful message, and the Torah brings that to us, and we have continued to go ahead and teach that. But you just did something that was very, very special, and the gift that you gave. I have always thought that's the central message for social justice work and racial work that we go ahead and engage in as religious leaders. But the spin that I think this introduction to this notion of tshuva and anava, humility, connecting tshuva, I mean, obviously it's the season, but the notion of connecting tshuva to this work, I think is a tremendous chiddush. And I am totally sold, and it resonates very, very, very powerful with me, because what you're basically saying is, in order to see, in order to be present, in order to hear and live and be in relationship, we need to get rid of and strip off that hubris, right? And to actually be in a place of realizing I am just a human being and I'm making my way in the world, and that person is making their way in the world, and we get things wrong. And that's the notion of tshuva, total anava. And you're right, the Rambam goes ahead and says, the hope is ani ish acher, I'm a different human being. And so that chiddush that you're putting, especially as we move into Elul, that tshuva is central. It's tremendous chiddush, and thank you. And for me, it resonates very, very deeply.
Yes, may it be so. Bein hamitzarim, may we leave the narrowness and come into a space of expanse where we can hold our own and others' humanity and fullness.
Oh, so Yavilah, I hope I've communicated that this has been a transformative conversation for me. And I know it will be for those people who are on, and for whom the people who will see this talk in the future. I hear that there was some difficulty with our link getting on. And so thank goodness this has been recorded, and this Torah can go out into the world, because I think that you're offering us tremendous chidushim, tremendous insights that are transformative, and also you're asking us to go ahead and to see more deeply, and we can see you, and we feel that you can see us, and we want to be pushed to see more people. So do you want to leave us with any last thoughts as all of these leaders move into this work on both sides of the ocean, right? This avodah that's so rich and so challenging and so complex, and so precious and so needed.
The only thing I'll say is that, there's a way in which there's a lot going on in the world right now. And there's a way in which it's not all, cupcakes and rainbows. There's a lot of darkness and a lot of shadow that a lot of us are facing, whether it be from illness or whether it be from, the various struggles that have come into the world because we're not seeing each other's humanity. But as we face that, I hope people will do that with a sense of hope. And coming out of Tisha B'Av, I leave you with the story of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabban Gamliel on Har Habayit, on the Temple Mount. And the way in which, when Rabbi Akiva saw the fox coming out of the holy and sacred space that even we as human beings weren't allowed to go into because it was so sacred, and a fox came out and he laughed. He laughed. And the other Tanaim said to him, "What are you laughing? We're weeping. This is terrible. This is a desecration of the space that we held most holy as a people." And he said that he laughed because he was able to hold the both and of what I call light and shadow, which is what life is itself. He was able to hold that as long as Uriah's prophecy had been fulfilled, then now Zechariah's prophecy can now also come. So I think life is a both and like that. Uriah's prophecy was that things had to be destroyed. And Zechariah's prophecy was that, and things will continue to grow up. What is the both and of racial equity and justice that will allow us to be able to see the terrible tragedies that have occurred, real tragedies that are a part of our history, but also hold the hope that we are the ones we've been waiting for to make that difference, and that it's already on its way. So I want us to hold, as we head into the Yamim Noraim, a sense of hope that this is not just an opportunity to see what's been bad or what's been terrible or where we only need repair. It's also a time to see the strength that we've carried over 5,000 years that is going to carry us into a new day. So may it be so, and may I leave you on a note of hope.
May it be so. You're asking us to hold complex truths that sometimes pull each other apart, but may we all have the strength to hold the light and the darkness and still feel the light as we move forward, to hold that complexity. And Yavilah, I just want to thank you again on behalf of all of our representatives in Israel who are doing all of this important work on the ground. We are a shaliach for them. And we feel that, and we were honored that you were our shaliach to them to bring this light. And the world needs it, and we need to hold on to these various truths at times that it's so difficult. But as you say, if not for me, if not for us, if not for all of us leaning into the responsibility and asking others to lean into this responsibility, the world would be darker. But as you say, the truth of Tisha B'Av and all of our experiences is that there is that light, even through the pain and destruction. So that's a tremendously optimistic note. Thank you for your Torah. Thank you for your message. And I just want you to know, I feel like I'm ready to enter into Elul. So
Amen.
now I just have to roll up our sleeves. So thank you. Thank you for being in conversation for us. May this be the beginning of a relationship of seeing one another. And we should all have the strength to do all of this work. Thank you for making time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.